Hello, I'm Nathan Carlin. This is Life and Work. Life and Work is a series where we talk to scholars and intellectuals about the connections between their public scholarship and their personal lives. Life and Work is supported by the McGovern Center for Humanities and Ethics. Well, today on Life and Work, we have Larry Churchill. He's Professor Emeritus at Vanderbilt University. Welcome, Dr. Churchill.
Thank you, Nate.
As always, we'll be talking about matters of life and work. Dr. Churchill, why don't you tell me a bit about your education and your early mentors?
Well, I started as a philosophy major at Rhodes College because it was just fun. I was just attracted to the meaning questions in philosophy, and then knew I really probably wanted a career as an academic, career in teaching, and I really wanted to teach not philosophy but religious studies. And at that time, the only way into that avenue to a PhD program was through divinity school. And I thought that would be great anyway, and so I went to Duke, both for divinity and then for the PhD training. I had some really significant mentors. I had a philosophy professor, well, I would say two at Rhodes, which were who were very influential on me in terms of kind of shaping my understanding of philosophy and what is it and how does it work and what use is it and those kind of things. Jerry Gill and Larry Lacey, both of whom are long since retired, but both of whom are still alive and I've communicated with, which has been nice.
Where, did you grow up Presbyterian? Rhodes is
I did.
Yeah.
I did, yeah. I grew up as a Presbyterian. My family was Presbyterian, and they were deeply religious people. And they thought it was great I was going to divinity school because they thought the minister was one of the more important people in the community, typically. And so I got a lot of support from them. And but I had some important mentors in divinity school. Interestingly, one of the people I would point to was the Hebrew professor. A wonderful guy, William F. Steinspring. And he was, I didn't realize it quite as much at the time, he was an internationally eminent scholar and had played a big part. A little story. He had played a big part in the what was then new, the Oxford Annotated Bible.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
And he had translated, written the introductions and all the annotations for 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. And this was a time, as I guess every time is, of a kind of reactive conservatism. So in Durham, some of the fundamentalist churches were buying these Bibles and burning them in a bonfire, these new Bibles.
The Oxford Annotated
Bible. Yeah, because they weren't the King James and they were the work of the devil, and right?
Yeah, right.
So the local news came out to interview Steinspring about this. And they say, well, what do you think about this? He said, I think things have improved dramatically. He said, what do you mean? He said, well, they used to burn the people, now they just burn the books. But he was that kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he was also Presbyterian, but a wonderful professor, just humane and deeply interested in his students.
Yeah.
And it kind of surprised me because I wasn't a major in Hebrew and didn't do the studies much beyond that.
Yeah.
But, some people just strike you as important because I think of the demeanor in the classroom and the way he held himself. Not too seriously.
Yeah.
Very serious about his work.
Yeah.
But he wasn't so serious about himself. And I just thought that was a very mature demeanor,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. So at Rhodes, I assume you're a young person. You have some sense of quest, some sense of meaning, or something. You get into philosophy, and you think, I want to have a career in teaching. I want to pursue this. And how did it switch to, or maybe it wasn't a switch, to religious studies and not philosophy or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the questions that interested me in philosophy were questions about meaning and questions about who are we as human beings, and how do we understand ourselves, and what's the best way to live. I mean, just the old fundamental questions. And I didn't think philosophy departments at the graduate level were doing much of that. They were all beginning to be very analytical.
Yeah.
Ordinary language philosophy was really big then. And metaphysical questions, ontological questions, were kind of thought to be not as important.
But those were still alive in religious studies
They
circles.
were.
And,
Yeah,
yeah.
they were. That was the whole, substance of that, is trying to explore the great breadth of human experience and understanding, including, the transcendent dimension and religion and the understanding of religion as a fundamental component in human life, not just as going to church and not just as an option you could have to believe or not believe, but the whole dimension of humanity as something that our species just does. We are,
Yeah.
like it or not. We have experiences that are beyond us.
Yeah.
And that defy human understanding, or what Gabriel Marcel would call the mystery. He said there are problems. You can solve those. You can learn techniques. Other people can learn them. They can solve problems the same way. But mysteries can't be solved. They're things you have to live with. And kind of the acceptance of something that is beyond your understanding, but which is important in your life because it gives it a depth and a meaning.
Yeah.
Even though you can't kind of fully grasp it conceptually.
And do you feel like that it sounds like, tell me if this is right, this interest and appreciation of mystery as part of the human condition is something that has been consistent throughout your life, something that goes back to college days, graduate school days, and something that's very much alive right now for you?
Yeah, very much so. And, interestingly, Nate, as I've gotten older, it's become an even more important element because we're trying to now, I'm 79, we're trying to figure out issues I haven't encountered before, like physical limitations and, not being as sharp mentally as I used to be, and other kind of senses that life has limits. You're no longer in question about whether you're going to die anymore at 79.
Yeah.
You've sorted that out, and you've come to accept it in whatever way you can. So that mystery dimension, in a way, gets bigger or takes a different shape, maybe. But it's been there all the way through. Things like love and graciousness and kindness have an element of unpredictability and a sense of something beyond us a little, We can surprise ourselves, and say, oh, my goodness, It can go the other way, too. You can surprise yourself because you're a lot more cruel than you ever imagined or hoped you were. But, yeah, it's the other side of it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, yeah. So there is some kind of religious meaning center core that's been consistent your whole life, really.
I think so.
Yeah.
Nature is one of the big conduits for the sacred for me, and I think always has been. And so it's like the experience of being out in nature as a place you belong, but a place in which is much more powerful, much more mysterious than you ever kind of imagined, is very strong, and other people have that in different ways. It's various.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that. I think that whenever I feel the most sort of religious or spiritual or whatever at home, I guess could be the word, at ease, I guess. It would be in nature, That's right. I can definitely relate to that.
I was reading this book recently by William Barrett, who was the guy who wrote, Irrational Man. He was an important philosopher in the 70s and maybe the 80s. But this book is called The Illusion of Technique, which is a fascinating book. And it's almost a kind of a Gabriel Marcel book. It's like not everything is technique. There are mysterious human skills at work and lots of things. But near the end, he's talking about a very powerful experience he had just looking at the bark on a tree and saying, wow, who knew, But the line I remember is, until human beings can find themselves in nature, God can't find them.
Yeah.
So it's like understanding that you're biological, you're an animal, you're a part of this living, breathing thing. You're not something else.
Not separate.
Not separate.
Yeah, and so much of our lives, for most of us, or a lot of us, or at least for me, is lived as separate whenever you live in an urban environment or something like that. I mean, I also really appreciate what you're saying about these other qualities of sort of love and things like that. For me, I think love and hope, whenever I see some kind of authentic, genuine expression of forgiveness or acceptance.
Yes.
Whenever it's done in a very beautiful way, almost always moves me to tears. And then also hope, whenever there's some kind of beautiful expression of hope,
Yeah.
Like which is, for me, I guess, hope and acceptance are kind of related, like this, a second chance, whenever.
Right.
But it's almost always art that. So I guess for me, it's art and nature are really important in that regard, And back to your story. So you're at divinity school. You go to divinity school, and my understanding is that you worked as a parish pastor at that time.
I did.
Is that right?
I
Can you
did.
tell me about that?
I had a small parish in Hillsborough, just outside Hillsborough, North Carolina, which is just north of Durham and Chapel Hill. It was a congregation of farmers, egg farmers, dairy farmers, tobacco farmers, and it was like one of the most important experiences in my life in terms of understanding people, what concerns them, how they think and feel. But as I was telling you earlier, it's kind of like it's where I really begin to appreciate a kind of elemental goodness in people, a kindness, a forbearance. I was really young, inexperienced, very green, but they took me in, and it was an element of trust on their part that I really appreciated. But I just learned so much about what makes people tick. And that was incredibly important, I think, for some of the future work I did in ethics consulting later in life. Because entering a patient's room in which the family is around, you felt a little sense about how to begin to relate to them and how to find out what concerns they had and where were they hung up on an issue about the care of their father or mother.
That there was some kind of congruence between parish ministry and the clinical ethics work.
Yes, because frequently you're dealing with people who have real problems, real life problems, on the hoof. It's not a theory. It's right there in front of you.
Yeah.
And what you need is to win their trust if they are going to be honest with you, if they're going to be candid and open. So that's the big job, How can I present myself as trustworthy? How can I show that I'm really interested in you and what you're thinking and feeling? So that we can maybe find a resolution to the problem we have.
I imagine that's a hard thing to put in words or to teach. Like if you were to teach somebody clinical ethics now, or I mean, is it possible to put that in? Because you're saying it's it was the experience of parish ministry that formed you for this.
Yes.
So I guess the question would be, if you were to teach clinical ethics today, if they're coming to you, they say, well, how do I present myself in a trustworthy way? How do I win their trust?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
I say, let's see how you walk in the door. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Let's see how you're comporting your own body in relation to them. I mean, really simple things like, are your arms folded?
Yeah.
Do you have a frown or smile?
Yeah.
Do you look like you're interested? Are you willing to keep eye contact? Are you more interested in understanding the problem intellectually about what's ordinary treatment and what would be acceptable treatment? Or are you more interested in them, where they are, how they perceive things? That's just, it's also true in teaching. It's like you're never teaching just the subject matter. You're teaching students. And really the most important thing is where they are. What are they, where are they coming from? Then you can make some headway. But you have to engage the students first, and then you can engage the subject matter.
Yeah.
And I think that's just true for consult work. People know, they read you immediately. They know whether you're interested or not, whether you're being genuine.
Yeah.
It's in the tone of voice. It's in how you sit down, and I mean, it sounds silly, but it's so basic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you looking bored or are really interested? Do you want them to tell you more?
Yeah. So much of it is nonverbal, and yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you can't fake it. It's like people also can spot a phony.
Yeah.
You can smell you coming in the door, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And so it sounds like that your model of teaching something of clinical ethics would be maybe something like an apprenticeship or something where you're watching them and then it's one-on-one, and that
Yeah. That's exactly right. And seeing how other people do it and saying, oh, this is why it works,
Yeah.
And then talking about that, reflecting on it.
Yeah.
But also on the failures, on the time when you can't connect.
Yeah.
And that happens too, so you have to say, what was it that put it in the ditch in this context?
Yeah. Did you, in your seminary training, did you have CPE, clinical pastoral?
No. I didn't have anything like that.
No.
Divinity school was kind of like a free-for-all when I was there because it was the Vietnam War was on and curriculums were wide open. So I could have taken as much as half my coursework anywhere in the university.
Oh, wow, okay.
And the requirements were few.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I took a lot more than was required, but CPE was, it was only later I learned how important that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I just brought that up because what you're saying, your way of teaching clinical ethics and the debriefing, and it sounds very similar to CPE. So I just wondered if you had gone through it and sort of brought, like I really wish that we would draw more on the CPE model here in the medical context. Even for psychiatry residents and things like that, I feel like there's a lot that could be learned and directly incorporated into the training.
People have to talk about their experiences, and they have to hear themselves talk out loud about it.
Yeah.
They have to have other people hear them and try to explain themselves, or have other people say, well, why did you do that, or what did you achieve or accomplish here? And it's that interaction, of dialectic and reflection, and then trying it again. One of the most successful things we ever did, actually, at Vanderbilt was record residents who were going into an ICU and give them a kind of a model family, actors.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And, there would be the hysterical person, and there would be the angry person,
Yeah.
and film them, videotape them, and then we would all come back and look at it later. Well, you'd learn a tremendous amount by seeing yourself in that context and seeing what you did and noticing,
Yeah.
Notice that you were really leaning back here. You got worried about things. You decided you didn't want to be here anymore. So
Yeah, that's right. To watch the video, to see your own body language, to hear your voice, and then to debrief it together.
Yes.
So,
one resident said, gosh, every time the mother started crying, I turned away from her and I talked to somebody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's profoundly helpful. Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. So back to so ministry, graduate school. You're working in the parish. How did that jump from graduate school to a career in medicine happen? That's
I got really lucky.
Yeah.
Nate, is the only way to say it. As a fresh PhD, there were very few jobs in religious studies. I always imagined I was going to be teaching religion and religious studies and philosophy of religion in some small liberal arts college, and leading the life of an academic like that.
Yeah. Like a professor at Rhodes College or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there were very few jobs, but I was very lucky. I got a postdoctoral fellowship, which was just being offered by the Society for Health and Human Values, which was the precursor for ASBH. And spent a year actually doing what were then the third-year clinical rotations. So I spent a month in surgery, a month in psychiatry, a month in pediatrics, and so on.
Where was this at?
This was at the University of North Carolina.
Okay,
Chapel
UNC.
Hill.
Yeah,
And I could have gone anywhere to do this, but I already knew a few people in Chapel Hill, some of whom were very, very helpful. Talk about good mentors. There was a religious studies professor named Rule Tyson, who was really helpful. He wrote a letter of recommendation for me. I had done some apprentice teaching with him while I was a graduate student, and he wrote a recommendation, and he put me in touch with a professor of medicine in the medical school who really thought this was the thing to do, really wanted a humanities ethics program, named James Bryan.
And what year was this?
This was 73, 74.
1973, 1974. Okay, yeah.
And that just eventually turned into a position there. I knew Chapel Hill was kind of interested in this, and sure enough, it grew. And they decided finally I was okay, and maybe they would invest a little in terms of a faculty position. So that was the beginning.
Oh, okay. Well, and so what year did they offer you?
75.
75, a faculty position.
Yeah.
And was it a standard sort of assistant professor kind of standard?
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, tenure track position.
Oh, it was really tenure track?
Yeah, it was. It was. So, a lot of help from people.
Yeah.
Convincing the dean that this was a good thing to do. And interestingly, the real help was from clinical faculty, not from the basic science faculty, who dealt with their discipline, biochemistry or whatever. But the clinicians saw the need for this. They saw how it could be helpful. Not all of them, but many of them.
Yeah.
And they were the big champions of this.
Yeah.
Not always, but, many of them were. Many of the influential people. And this is kind of funny, but two of the most important people were Presbyterians. Brian was a Presbyterian, and there was a surgeon named Ben Wilcox who was also Presbyterian. And they liked the fact that I was Presbyterian.
They did.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. And were you an ordained minister at that point?
I was.
And so everybody, did they see you as a minister? Like they saw this is bringing a minister into the medical school? Is that how you were seen, or how would they see it?
I think they saw it more as an academic position, but it helped that I was a man of the cloth at that time. And
that was kind of icing on the cake.
Yeah, it was kind of good. They thought they could trust me because,
Yeah. No,
So,
okay, yeah. So your academic position, and so what do you feel like was appealing to them? Could they put it into words? Was it we have ethical problems here? They're concerned about the moral fabric of society or something, or is it we need somebody to help people talk to people, talk to patients? Like, what would the rationale in their mind be?
it was mostly around the educational agenda. It was like, we need somebody who's working on this educationally because our students need this.
Our students.
And our students were more and more asking for it.
Yeah.
And they didn't feel, completely equipped to do that. And thought, if this were a concentration, if there was somebody really worrying about this, they could call them. And so that was a big part of it, I think.
Yeah.
And there were big social changes. The Patient's Bill of Rights was, rising to the fore. And people were demanding more information from physicians. The informed consent was really on the threshold of becoming a really big and important thing. And so how to do that, moving away from the paternalistic model in medicine to something more interactive, was a big part of their thinking. And
so today something like patient autonomy is kind of assumed. Yeah.
But it wasn't then.
It wasn't then.
Oh, it wasn't then. I remember when the Patient's Bill of Rights was considered by a committee at the medical center, I was in the meeting, and the chairman of pediatrics slammed his fist on the desk and said, "God damn it, we don't need this.
Really?
We don't need to do this. We're doing fine.
Yeah.
We tell patients what they need to know, and that's, that works.
Yeah.
So what is this? What is this?
Yeah.
Troublemakers from the,
They didn't appreciate it. They didn't.
Many of them didn't. Some of them saw, this is here,
Yeah.
Medicine is going to be different, and we need to figure out how to do it well.
Yeah.
So there were the, reactionaries, the old paternalists, and then there were the more progressive-minded clinicians.
Yeah.
Who in some ways already practiced this, They just thought this was, you include the patient in the conversation and the decision making. So they, this was their style of practicing medicine anyway.
Yeah.
And they were increasingly unhappy with many of their colleagues.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of ferment in medicine at that at that time. And so ethics was there kind of at the right time, the humanities.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah, and so you had a remarkable career at Chapel Hill, UNC. I think you said 29 years or
29 years.
29 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you go as being the first faculty member sort of in this area, and you create a department, build a department. It grows to something like 12 people, 14 people, something like that.
Yeah.
And so over that almost 30 years, how do you think, how did you see the field of bioethics, medical humanities, like growing, changing? What did you observe?
I think everything was changing. Students were changing. We were getting more women.
Yeah.
The admission of large numbers of women made a profound difference.
Mm.
It made the biggest difference for the male students who were no longer part of this little cliquey club,
Yeah.
who told sexist jokes all the time. It was now egalitarian. The women were far more attuned, generally speaking, okay, big generalization, to the sensitivities of patients, the need for informed consent, the idea that medicine itself needed to be a far more humane profession.
Mm.
It didn't need to drive its practitioners into the ground. These are women who wanted families, and
Yeah.
that was a huge difference. And then kind of following in quick pursuit from that was the introduction of female faculty.
Mm.
That also made a big difference.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And another part of it was, I think, the humanities and ethics just sort of proved themselves as something valuable.
Mm.
The students liked the teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing interesting research. And it was also a very good time in terms of financing. There was a lot of money flowing into medical schools.
Mm.
And because of that, they could have a sense of, yeah, we can develop this like we're developing surgery and pediatrics and anything else. We're willing to develop this part of the curriculum as well.
Mm.
So we had good, solid curriculum time, and we needed to staff it.
Yeah.
It was a confluence of, I think, many events.
Yeah.
Now it's much tighter. Money's much tighter in medical centers.
Yeah.
As you well know, and it's not that the case isn't just as needy as it always has been, maybe more so, but the finances are much tighter. Nobody wants to pay for medical care anymore, and some of the research has dried up. So it's a little different environment, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of elements came together to help us.
Yeah, that's interesting. So your time at Chapel Hill there was basically 1975 to roughly 2005, basically.
2002 is when I moved to Vandy. Yeah.
You moved to Vandy about 2002. Yeah. So that's interesting. So it's a time of tremendous growth. It's a time where women are entering as medical students, as faculty. You can see the culture of saying, hey, patients' voices matter, and then among the faculty level, women say, well, work-life balance matters. We're still in the midst of that.
That's right.
I don't think we haven't figured that issue out yet. At the faculty level especially, but I think that it's very much talked about. Like burnout is obviously a huge kind of thing.
It really is.
Yeah,
it really is. I think another thing is that the technology was growing so fast,
mm-hmm.
and the research enterprise was growing so fast, and there were clear indications that it wasn't being done well, that people were being abused, of which Tuskegee is just one example. Yeah. One big example.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of worry about, is the research enterprise ethical?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we know that it is? And how are we getting research subjects? And so that was a big part of it too. That became a part of our ambit.
Yeah.
And, ECMO, the extracorporeal oxygen devices, people became more sophisticated. The technology became more sophisticated in terms of how long you could keep a person alive. Transplants were beginning to be customary. There was just an awful lot going on in which the ethics of the technology was a question.
Yeah.
And so, that was a big part of it too, of its growing and staying power.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be unusual for somebody in my field to become involved in the training of people who are going into research, giving talks about informed consent and talking about how do you know a good consent when you see one, and what do people have to be told, and what's a good experimental design that follows ethics.
Yeah.
So there was increasingly work to do.
Yes.
That, for better or worse, people thought we were maybe in a position to do
help.
some of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you see as some of the big issues that bioethics is paying attention to today, or should pay attention to today?
Well, for the last 3 years, my biggest concern has been bioethics neglect of global warming. Which, if there ever was a bioethics issue, not just a biomedical issue, but a bio issue about the degradation of life, including our own, this is it.
Yeah.
But bioethics has been traditionally so focused on clinical care, clinical research. The whole clinical context has been its chief area of work, that we've neglected that, with a few exceptions. But I think we are natural people to take some leadership in terms of understanding what's happening. And the health implications are profound in terms of bad air, flooding, huge migrations, the reemergence of infectious diseases because of the mosquito population, for example, will go way up in a time of great flooding. There will be less arable land. There will be problems of allocation that will be very profound. Who gets to live and who dies on massive population scales. And this is it's a global issue,
Yeah.
So it's one of the ways we could make partnership with lots of people internationally, all over the world. But we haven't taken a very robust role. There are a few people, but not many. So this has been one of my cause célèbres, recently, saying, how are we going to get bioethics to recognize this is a very important area in which they need to be at work?
Yeah.
And taking some leadership. Not to mention the pollution that big medical centers put out into the environment. One of the biggest polluters are medical centers.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they use up tremendous resources, and they put out, well, let's just say through the exhaust of anesthesia,
Oh, wow.
and through medical waste, bandages, beds, sheets,
Yeah.
that they use in huge quantities.
Yeah. Because of the concerns of sanitation and things.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Necessary to do, but we could do it in a way that is...
Is there a way to do it more efficiently?
Yeah, and there are models for that.
There are?
There are,
yeah.
But, so that's one of my big things.
Yeah.
But aging is another, and since I'm old myself, I've become more interested in that. But I don't think we have a good understanding of aging. We have a lot of stereotypes.
Yeah.
We have the out to pasture, harmless, benign grandparent reading to his grandchild model.
Mm-hmm.
We have the greedy geezer model because we spend 7 times as much on the elderly as on the 18 and under group in terms of federal dollars. We have the invisible model. You know, people don't see you anymore because you're not important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not functioning. You're not out there in some kind of social position after you're retired.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm very interested in that because I don't think we understand aging as not just a matter of trying to patch people back together after they break a hip or lose some of their other mobility or mental faculties, but as a dimension of life that has profound meaning for people.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were speaking earlier, a time in life in which great happiness and joy is possible.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in spite of the losses, although that's part of it, but because of the losses.
Because of the losses.
Because of the losses. It's like the losses give you an understanding that you never had before about your mortality, about human frailty, about the fact that you need to live your life with as much joy as you possibly can because it'll be over.
Yeah.
You know, there's no denying anymore that you're going to live a long time. You know you're going to die. And the question is, what does your life mean now? And what can you do for the good of the world? Even if it's just something like being as kind as possible to people you meet.
Yeah. Yeah.
That becomes, well, a source of enormous happiness.
Yeah.
Where happiness is like that deep sense you have of that life is fundamentally good.
Yeah.
It's a field or an expansive experience that I want us to try to describe better and get in touch with and also promote.
Yeah.
Here's an example. Here's Dan Callahan in the 1980s and 1990s saying, you know, there's a time in life when we should stop focusing so much on just life extension and high-tech interventions and worry about people's quality of life. And can they live comfortably, you know? And he was dead right, although the way that got interpreted in debates was like you're ageist. You're just biased against the elderly.
With his Setting Limits book.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a sense in which you don't care so much how long you live, you just want to have as deeply meaningful a life as you can. And if that were appreciated more, we'd spend a lot less flogging people at the end of life in hospitals. We'd spend a lot more in trying to make sure that the elderly live above the poverty level and have social support, adequate housing.
Yeah.
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 One of the things that happened with Social Security and then Medicare is that a lot of people, the elderly living in poverty, got pulled above the poverty line. But they didn't get pulled up very far. So there are about a third of the elderly that live just kind of on the margins up there.
Yeah.
And while at the same time we're spending tons of money on life-extending technologies, you know the old statistics about, it's the last year of life that's the most expensive because that's where we throw all the resources.
Right.
In ERs and tube feeding and respirators and last ditch kind of effort. But I would love to be a part of a movement that has just a better understanding about the entire phases of the life cycle and gives us a different understanding about aging.
Yeah, yeah. Your comment about you've found later life sort of more meaningful or happier or more satisfying or more of a gift because of the losses is a interesting, poignant observation. It reminds me. I can't remember. I have to go back and look, but I think Freud wrote an essay. I think it was either during World War II or something. I think it was thoughts during the time of war and death or something, where he's talking about a rose, and he says a rose is beautiful because it's going to wilt. It's because it's not in bloom all the time. That's what makes that. That's why we can appreciate the rose. And he says it's the same with mortality. And so I guess what I hear you saying is sort of as you get in touch with that, and I guess we all know that. We all know that we're going to die intellectually, right? We all know that. It's not a surprise to anyone. But there's a different. What I hear you saying is that there's a different kind of knowing, sort of by living through the process of aging, that you know it in a new way. It's sort of like knowing the rose in a new way, and that enables you to live in a different way.
Yeah.
Which is to be in the moment. We all say we need to live in the moment. We need to appreciate the moment. We all say that in a rational way, but you know it in a different way, and you get to live in a different way.
You feel it.
You feel it.
You really feel it instead of just knowing it in your head.
Yeah.
But I think this is exactly right, Nate. Emily Dickinson said that it never comes again is what makes life so sweet. And Wallace Stevens had this wonderful poem in which one of the lines is, "Death is the mother of beauty." Same idea here.
Yeah. Death is the mother of beauty. Yeah.
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 One of my favorite stories is out of the Odyssey, where Odysseus is offered immortality with Calypso.
Uh-huh. No, I don't know this story.
Yeah. He's trying to get home, and he turns it down. She's beautiful. They have wonderful life. On this island, immortality, and he says no. He says, all my days I long for to be reunited with my homeland. And so he goes home, but it's like Calypso, being immortal, can't understand the longing for something that's passing, the beauty of something that's... Immortality gives you infinite numbers of times for, love and happiness and victory and defeat and all the rest. But if it's limited, then it's precious.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I just think this is one of the themes that's very important. And in this light, it seems to me every loss you have is a kind of a down payment on death. I think Freud said that, actually. But every loss is a preparation. It's a lesson for the big loss.
Yeah.
So it's just, I like to think, yes, I'm slower now. I limp sometimes. I have aches and pains. But that's what was intended for me. That's what the human condition is really about. And that's what also makes it blessed, wonderful.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, death is a gift we've been given.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without it... So, the story of Oliver Swift, and Gulliver's Travels, and they're the Struldbrugs. The Struldbrugs are people who can't die, and they grow into greater and greater decrepitude, but they can't die. And they become pariahs. They're treated like aliens. And in his, stories, they get a red dot on their forehead, so they're recognized and shunned.
Yeah.
So there's a sense in which death is a release from those kind of travails. And it's a story I've used a lot in my teaching, without death, we wouldn't be human. This is a part of the glory of being human, is that we do pass, like all of nature.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other examples, but maybe not the only, but my favorite example of this comes from Walt Whitman, who writes, this is in that long poem called When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, which was a kind of his grieving over the death of Abraham Lincoln. There's a 4-stanza section which is kind of a hymn to death, and how the human situation ought to be to welcome it, not tragic death, not premature death, but the fact that we are mortal is a fact that we should celebrate. It's a beautiful thing. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I would very, very much enjoy that. I think another. This is sort of congruent with this topic, or maybe implied with it, with the conversations about meaning and death. Spirituality has become a big part of your life.
Yes.
And you've kind of, I don't know if this is accurate to say or not, but you've kind of moved from being religious to spiritual. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, depending on the words. I mean, I still claim in a sense to be religious in some kind of sense.
Uh-huh.
I have failed institutional religion, by which I mean I've never been happy.
Happy with institutions.
Yeah. Although, almost all of my life I've belonged somewhere to some church and, became an Episcopalian, in midlife and all of that. But it's like the longing for a kind of connection with things that are transcendent rarely came through the institutionalized forms, and more often came through personal experiences. And so spiritual, I decided, was the right term for me, and a lot of other people have decided that too, because they find transcendent meaning, or the sacred, if you will, in life, but it isn't necessarily the church or its forms are no longer a conduit for that in the same way that they are for many people, which I respect entirely, because we're all a little different in that way. But spiritual is a term I've latched onto that it helps me explain this kind of broadened dimension of connectedness with something larger and more powerful and beneficent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's. I think it's completely fair to say that the church has hurt a lot of people, done a lot of harm, and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's perfectly reasonable for many people to walk away and say, I can't do that, but I'm still religious, I'm still spiritual in some way. I need to find a way to express that.
Yeah, that's right.
And there are more and more people. What I find interesting about you is that you're in a position to also think about the clinical implications of that. Like, I think that there's a lot of people who have studied it from religious studies or sociological, this movement of spiritual but not religious. But I don't think many people have picked up this question that you have, and I think you've written about it recently, about, well, what does it mean to be spiritual but not religious in the clinical context? What does that mean for clinical ethics? And yeah.
Because the questions they're asking won't come in the kind of typical form. They'll come in some other form. But I think it's a matter of trying to figure out what people are most deeply concerned about and what they find, when do they really touch reality in their lives. Because the characteristic, as I understand it, of spiritual or religious experiences is that you're put in touch with something that's more real, something that isn't passing, something that is more powerful than you, a design, an organization that you belong to, that you feel you belong to, that's big and enormous and transcends all the ego concerns you've ever had about yourself. You know, and if you can get people into a context in which you find what that means in a particular setting, like the death of a relative, then you're really into pay dirt. You're into how they can live with the decisions they have to make and how they can accept them. How can they go on and survive this trauma in their life? Yeah.
And
so sometimes it is organized religion. People are trying to be a really good Catholic. They're trying to follow the teachings of Jesus as they understand the Catholic Church has taught them to them. But other people are not. They're, they're working off of different senses of the sacred.
Yeah, and how to be open to that in this moment of often crisis. And
so it's interesting. See, decision language kind of falls away. It becomes a little secondary. It's like you're trying to find the path you need to walk here.
Yeah.
This is the way to go. This is the path I need to follow at this time in my life, in this context.
Yeah.
And then the decision sort of presents itself.
That it's not decisions, when it's not principles. It's more like story and walking, or
it's more like getting oriented.
Getting oriented.
Yes.
Yeah.
And once I'm oriented, then I can see what needs doing.
Get oriented and then see what needs doing.
Yeah. Because the orientation is the tough part.
Yeah.
Because this is all family illnesses are crises.
Yeah.
And so how should I respond here is an ethical question, but it's an ethical question that's grounded in who I take myself to be.
Yeah.
Who am I here? It's like H. Richard Niebuhr. It's all response. Recognizing recognizing where you are and who you are in this context, and then saying, here's what I now need. I understand I need to do. So it's not a decision. It's not, decision trees with logic and reasons and nearly so much as it is getting your bearings.
Getting your bearings, yeah. Well, Dr. Churchill, this has been wonderful. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it tremendously, Nate. I thank you for the opportunity.